And there are two major questions that you would need to answer. And we're going to be attempting to answer those two questions today. The first question is, what is low self-esteem? And it's not a question of the definition of low self-esteem as something you might see on ChatGPT or whatever. It is, what is low self-esteem to you? The second question is how to defeat low self-esteem. What exactly are we to do to break out of the cycle of low self-esteem? Now, the first thing we need to understand in understanding what low self-esteem is low self-esteem is a compilation, a compendium of behaviors. Generally, every human being that has a certain trait or a certain behavior, it is simply a compilation, a compendium of behaviors. And so, low self-esteem is a compendium or a compilation of behaviors like shyness, timidity, refusal to take compliments, trying to please people, a whole lot of them. And so these behaviors come together to form what is going to develop to become low self-esteem for you and for me. And so we need to understand that what low self-esteem is that low self-esteem is a compilation, a compendium of behaviors. Another thing we need to understand is that there are two types of low self-esteem. We have the general low self-esteem and we have the specific low self-esteem. The general low self-esteem is the one that people can point to and sort of define. It's the one that has a person who is so scared to talk in public, a person who is shy, someone who does not want to be seen, the person who acts like as if they are not a human being, they are substandard of a human being. That's the general one. However, general low self-esteem only applies to like 20% of people. And that's why you may not get to meet that many persons with low self-esteem that are general. There are a lot of people. In fact, I dare to say that 80% of people have specific low self-esteem. They battle the specific low self-esteem. And so this forms 80% of people. So what then is specific low self-esteem? What makes up specific low self-esteem? You get to meet some people, they are wonderful, they are, bold, courageous, they have audacity, they can speak in front of a crowd, they can talk to people that they want, they can do all of that. However, when you get close to them, you start to discover that this man doesn't like when a female is above him. It's a symptom, a trait of low self-esteem. Right? And so what happens is that specific thing is under the category of specific low self-esteem. But because it is not in the definition of general low self-esteem, the person doesn't find the need to address it. So specific low self-esteem can come in form of emotions, can come in form of finances. Certain persons believe that 1 billion naira can never come to them. They feel they are not worthy, they are not deserving of it. That's just an example, typical example of specific low self-esteem. And so, if you want to understand what low self-esteem is, you first need to understand, am I under the category of general low self-esteem or specific low self-esteem? I'll give you an example. A friend of mine who lives in Abuja, and I stay in Ibadan. So I was in Lagos for a while, and my friend lives in Abuja. And I asked him, I said, oh, when are you going to come to Lagos? I think his response was, I booked my flight for the 16th. And I discovered that that's a symptom of low self-esteem, but specific. Because this my particular friend comes from a home where finances were not so good, and now things are getting better for him. Anytime he makes a major purchase or spends a certain amount of money, he finds the need to include it in every conversation. And so the answer to that question should have been, I'm going to be in Lagos on the 16th. I'm going to be around on the 16th. I'm coming on the 16th. Not, I booked my flight for... Because I didn't ask him when he booked his flight for. That's an example of specific low self-esteem. esteem. So what then causes low self-esteem? There's something called the starting factor. There's something called the starting factor. If you trace your life back, you will get to see at one point or the other, you were bedeviled by a certain situation. That was your starting factor. For most people, when they were in school, they were called ugly. For some people, they were called poor. Some were called dullards, right? And that's what metamorphosized and grew into what is now low self-esteem for them. And so because they were called dullards, they didn't want to speak in class anymore. They didn't find the need for their voice to be heard. So timidity as a behavior started crippling in. Now, here is how that starting factor now becomes low self-esteem. It becomes low self-esteem through practice. I mentioned earlier that human beings are a compilation of behaviors. So any trait you have is a compilation of certain behaviors. What that means is that your low self-esteem is a compilation of certain behaviors. And so the starting factor, right, which could have been them insulting you when you were in school, them calling you ugly, big nose, dullard, what have you. The starting factor now gave you behaviors that you started to practice over the years. So let's assume your starting factor, you encountered your starting factor in, let's say, your GSS2, right? That's junior secondary school 2, class 2. You encountered your starting factor. From GS2 to your GS3 to your to your SS1, your SS2, your SS3, 100 level, 200 level, 300 level, 400 level, you kept practicing timidity. You kept practicing it. Anytime you want to speak, you tell yourself, oh, don't speak. What you're doing is that you're practicing the behaviors. The continual practice of those certain behaviors is what has now turned into low self-esteem for you. So the continual practice of timidity turns into low self-esteem. The continual practice of shyness, of people-pleasing, of refusing compliments. These are things that now form into low self-esteem. And so, what exactly do we now need to defeat low self-esteem? Now we're trying to understand how to defeat low self-esteem. We said what low self-esteem is not a definition, rather, what does it mean to you? That's the first question. What does it mean to you? And it can either be specific or can be general. And it is started by something called a starting factor. That starting factor metamorphosized into low self-esteem because you have continually practiced the behaviors that the starting factor gave to you. So how then do we fight out of low self-esteem? The answer was already mentioned in the words. Since low self-esteem is a product of certain behaviors that have been practiced over time, confidence is a product of certain behaviors that have been practiced over time. And so the formula is finding your starting factor plus admitting your starting factor. You need to admit, you need to accept, acknowledge the starting factor. And then the last thing is to do the opposite of the starting factor. So you need to find the starting factor. You need to acknowledge your starting factor. Acknowledge it that, okay, I have no self-esteem because when I was in secondary school, people called me a dullard, and then I now felt like I wasn't smart enough, I wasn't deserving enough, I wasn't pretty enough, I looked ugly, I wasn't attractive enough, I wasn't rich enough, I don't come from a good home. You need to acknowledge it. When you acknowledge it, then every other thing becomes easy for you. And then the last thing is to do the opposite. You start to practice behaviors opposite from that which you have been practicing over the years. Anybody who is audacious or courageous will tell you they practice behaviors like talking when they need to talk, entering rooms with confidence, making attempts, trying and failing, accepting failure. Those are behaviors that form a confident person. And so, if we're going to understand and defeat low self-esteem, we need to first understand what low self-esteem means to us, and then the behaviors that we have been practicing over the years that have formed low self-esteem. And lastly, we need to understand how to defeat it. And the simple answer is by the continual practice of behaviors that will propel us into confidence.